Neil Stephenson described virtual reality to his snowcraft readers thusly. Hyro is approaching the street. It is the Broadway, the Champs-Élysées of the metaverse. It is the brilliantly lit boulevard that can be seen, miniaturized, and backward reflected in the lenses of his goggles. It does not really exist, but right now, millions of people are walking up and down it. The dimensions of the street are fixed by a protocol, hammered out by the computer graphics ninja overlords of the Association for Computing Machinery's Global Multimedia Protocol Group. The street seems to be a grand boulevard going all the way around the equator of a black sphere with a radius a bit more than 10,000 kilometers. That makes it 65,536 kilometers around, which is considerably bigger than the Earth. Like any place in reality, the street is subject to development. Developers can build their own small streets feeding off of the main one. They can build buildings, parks, signs, as well as things that do not exist in reality, such as vast hovering overhead light shows, special neighborhoods where the rules of three-dimensional space-time are ignored, and free combat zones where people can go to hunt and kill each other. The only difference is that since the street does not really exist, it's just a computer graphics protocol written down on a piece of paper somewhere, none of these things is being physically built. They are, rather, pieces of software made available to the public over the worldwide fiber optics network.
And we'll discuss how virtual reality is shaping up in the real world, doubling your bandwidth with T-Mobile, the FCC's Velvet Glove, Tesla's seatbelt recall, binary stars becoming one, oxygen batteries, all sorts of computer history, and more on today's Citizens of Tech. On November 20th, we gathered in our virtual studio to record this epic bit of nerdery. We start the day with T-Mobile going for the jugular. T-Mobile's CEO has been quoted as saying both investors and customers are going to be real happy. This could be the biggest thing we've ever announced. This article comes to us from the LA Times, and they are doing a couple of big announcements. They actually announced this a few days ago. The first one that we actually almost sort of discussed this in a way when we were talking about ISPs and video bandwidth. But they are introducing unlimited video streaming, which does not impact your data limit.
But it's not video streaming for every video bit that's out there, I noticed. They're citing Netflix, Hulu, Fox Sports, and NBC Sports, but not YouTube or Twitch.
Correct. They are in the process of negotiating and working out the legality with YouTube and Twitch at this point. But yeah, Netflix, Hulu, Fox Sports, and NBC Sports are the big names that are signed on, at least. The one's big enough to be mentioned in the article. I don't know if there are any others. So yeah, if you want to stream any of these over your T-Mobile service, you can do that with no impact to your data limit. They already allow unlimited streaming of Spotify and Apple Music, which I'm a T-Mobile customer and I didn't even realize that. So
Actually, to me, unlimited Spotify is huge. I'm not a T-Mobile customer because for me, T-Mobile coverage doesn't extend well into the wilderness of northern New Hampshire where I spend a lot of my free time. Verizon Wireless is about the best you're going to get out there, where if you pop up on a ridgeline, there's a good chance you'll get at least something from a Verizon tower and you can pop out a message maybe. But unlimited Spotify is huge because that means if you don't want to be a Spotify premium customer and pay the $10 a month because you're willing to put up with the ads, you could just stream Spotify in the car. Because that's the thing you get with Spotify premium is that offline syncing so you can download songs to your device. I use that all the time. But now, T-Mobile customers, you can do unlimited Spotify and Apple Music, which I guess is doing okay too. I haven't actually tried it because I'm a Spotify user. But
yeah, I haven't tried it either. I do use Spotify, but I have not tried Apple Music. So the other bit of news here that I like as a T-Mobile customer is that they've also doubled bandwidth limits from 1, 3, and 5 gigabyte packages up to 2, 6, and 10 gigabytes. And that just is part of their service now.
I like that. That's interesting. And here's my logic. Now, I'm on Wi-Fi almost all the time. So from Verizon, I have their smallest package now,
Sure.
which is 1 gig. And that's enough because I'm on Wi-Fi all the time. But every time I travel, which happens a few times per year, I got to go out to the West Coast or whatever it might be. I'm always like, I get those messages from Verizon. They're like, hey, you've used 50% of your plan. Do that. I hate it.
Today. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and then of course I don't do anything recreational with a phone, like, watch a YouTube video or something. This doesn't happen. I cut it back to the bare minimum to make sure I don't exceed my 1 gig cap. So doubling it to 2, 6, and 10 from 1, 3, and 5 is actually a lot. So I mean, T-Mobile really wants your business.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of interesting that we've actually sort of we've broached this subject a couple of times in past episodes. One where when we were talking about the caching of Netflix with Night Watch, when I was talking about, trying to take my phone to the gym and trying to stream video and how it just chews up your bandwidth. So that this answers that. I now have 6 gigs of data, so I don't have quite the same amount of bandwidth. What are they? Range anxiety is for batteries. Bandwidth anxiety for your mobile plan, I guess.
Well, I mean, I guess bandwidth caps keep coming up as a recurring theme here for us. Because, but I have bandwidth anxiety for the data cap on my ISP plan, 350 gig a month, which I've gone over, I think, every month since they instituted it. I still haven't got the nasty note. I'm waiting for the nasty note. Nothing yet.
Not a hard cap. It's just
no, right? I'm waiting. No, at some point they're going to go, Banks, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Stop.
I'm being a digital citizen. Come on, get with the times. Anyway.
So another story here: the FCC preserves your right to hack your Wi-Fi router. Okay, this story comes from Engadget. And of course, if you're new to Citizens of Tech, all of the stories that we talk about, we have links to it in the show notes at citizensoftech.com. So you can dig right into the source material if you want to get more information and go from there. But this story goes back to some controversy that happened with the FCC. And the guts of the story are that the FCC had proposed in making Wi-Fi device manufacturers enforce their systems such that you couldn't load third-party firmware on there, and the FCC even named DDWRT or Tomato, which are very popular. Since most of the residential Wi-Fi router software that comes from the manufacturers just sucks. It's really awful, limiting and dumbed down, and you can't get at all the bells and whistles that the device might have. If you've got a supported device, DDWRT or Tomato, those are way better options for you if you're a nerd and like to hack around on these things. And so the world was in an uproar when the FCC announced this. And if you go back to why the FCC was doing this, it's got nothing to do with them not liking third-party firmware. It has everything to do with the fact that if you use DDWRT or Tomato, you can probably get at parts of the radio, turn on channels, and turn on radio frequencies that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get to because the wireless router has probably got the same guts in it that it does for the Japanese version or the European version, etc. And some of the radio frequencies that the thing is capable of talking on may not be legal in the U.S. because they conflict with other things that are important in the airwave spectrum, like some systems that happen at airports dealing with navigation and so on. And this is at the root of the problem here. FCC has put this whole issue out there because of some people running illegally modified Wi-Fi gear that was interfering with an airport systems and causing a safety issue. So, of course, everyone got up in arms about this, very specific naming of, that open source firmware was called out.
Yep.
And so now the FCC's backed off on that. They've taken that specific language out. And, because there was a very significant public outcry about this. And I think that's good. It's nice. The FCC doesn't want to take away your ability to run third-party firmware. They just want to make sure you can't access bits of the radio inside the system that you should not be able to in the U.S. marketplace.
For safety, ultimately, is what it boils down to.
And I'll buy that. That is the FCC's job, after all, is to govern the airwaves for, right to use, for the public interest, for safety, and so on. They're not just some draconian government, deity overstepping their bounds. I don't think whatsoever.
Yeah, that's not the impression I got from the beginning. I mean, the fact of the matter is that these open source projects do allow things to happen that the manufacturers don't intend to have be available to the end user normally. So they called them out because those are the tools that cause the issue. So
Yep.
I don't think it was a witch hunt or anything like that.
No.
The blog entry where the FCC actually talked about this on the FCC's blog was titled something along the lines of "clearing the air," pun intended, but just sort of setting the record straight and also making sure that the airwaves are clear for the necessary safety equipment and such. So
maybe it's a call out to the vendors to go, hey guys, if you want to put a dumbed down version for a non-tech savvy person to use, fine. But give us an advanced option for those of us that have some idea of what all the different options are for in a Wi-Fi router. I don't claim to know what all the every single option might do and why I'd want them, but I do know I know more than the average person, and I'm a techie guy, and I want to mess around with some of the settings to make it work best at my home and my neighborhood, et cetera. I've actually chosen which channel I want to use for best performance based on what my neighbors are running and so on. So on to some science astronomy news. You found this way cool story about 2 stars heading for catastrophe.
Yeah, so this is courtesy of the European Southern Observatory. Again, the link to this article will be in the show notes. This was just a fascinating read. The Very Large Telescope, which we have sort of mentioned in passing in the past, has found the hottest and most massive touching double star so far. The article quotes, using the ESO's Very Large Telescope, an international team of astronomers have found the hottest and most massive double star with components so close that they touch each other. The 2 stars are in the extreme system VFTS 352, and they could be heading for a dramatic end. So this system is located 160,000 light years away in the Tarantula Nebula. And so this is, it's a ways away, 160,000 years for light to get there. So these, we're looking into the past when we see this, which is just cool. So this remarkable region, quoting from the article, this remarkable region is the most active nursery of new stars in the nearby universe, and new observations from the Very Large Telescope have revealed that this pair of young stars is among the most extreme and strangest yet found.
You gotta think about this. Visualize this in your mind. The 2 stars are orbiting each other and touching each other. The surface, so I've seen various renderings of the surface of the sun and what that might look like, and I'm just imagining something like that, only 2 of them, bumping into one another. And is there solar flare activity when these are so close? Is it, it's got to be awesome.
It's crazy. So these things are extreme in just about every way that a star can be extreme. First of all, it's a binary system, so they orbit each other, right? Not only is that, that's not unheard of, but the really extreme bit about it is that they are going around each other. They are orbiting each other in just over a day. So 2 stars spinning around each other so fast that it takes less than a day for them to complete the orbit. That's crazy fast.
That's insane. Yeah.
Then, of course, they're so close that their surfaces touch, and the crazy fast orbit exerts enough pressure that they haven't, sort of condensed into one object at this point.
Just because they're moving so fast, they haven't. Right. Okay.
Right.
I mean, there's enough momentum there that they're not sucked into one another immediately.
Yeah. So they share about 30% of their mass between them. And the entire combined mass of the 2 stars is about 57 times that of our sun.
Wow.
Which, in the realm of stars, that's okay. That's a pretty decent sized star. It's not huge, but when you start talking about some of the massive superstars and things like that, but yeah, 57 times that of our sun. They're roughly the same size. So if you figure each is around almost 30 times the mass of our sun, it's a significant thing. So these are they exhibit what's called an over contact binary, which is where they touch, but they orbit each other. They are still two separate stars. So the dramatic end that the article talks about could go one of two ways. For the first one is that these could merge into one large, fast spinning, and possibly magnetic star. The lead scientist says, quote, if it keeps spinning rapidly, it might end its life as one of the most energetic explosions in the universe, known as a long-duration gamma ray burst. So this thing could actually turn into a giant pulsar, essentially. Or the other option is it could become a binary black hole situation. So it would actually be two black holes orbiting each other, which is ridiculous to even try to wrap your head around. But
it's like, surely that's a gateway to the multiverse or something.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, the lead scientist says, quote, if the stars are mixed well enough, they both remain compact, and the VFTS 352 system may avoid merging. This would lead the objects down a new evolutionary path that is completely different from classic stellar evolution predictions. In the case of VFTS 352, the components would likely end their lives in supernova explosions, forming a close binary system of black holes. Such a remarkable object would be an intense source of gravitational waves. So, I mean, just the theoretical physics are astronomical.
Eric, the universe is an awesome place, man.
So cool. And, this is millions or billions of years away from happening, but to be able to even do this thought experiment and think about and crunch numbers to figure out what impact this will have on the space around it, it blows me away. It's so cool.
Oh, I agree. Well, from the most awesome stars in the universe to the most awesome cars on the road, Tesla. Tesla is recalling 90,000 cars over a seatbelt concern. This comes from Reuters. The cost of the worldwide recall will be immaterial, Tesla says. Yeah, whatever, man. 90,000 cars, seatbelt. We'll fix it and ain't nothing but a thing. Someone was quoted as saying, I totally made that part up. But they did say that the worldwide recall will be immaterial. Not really a big deal.
Well, you spend more on coffee than that, right?
That's right. You should see how much we're spending on the Hyperloop. Whoa. So the problem, why they have this seatbelt concern, the problem was discovered after a single report to the company in early November of a seatbelt assembly breaking when a customer in the front passenger seat of a Model S on the road in Europe turned to talk with passengers in the rear seat. He was enormous. Oh, I added the he was enormous part. Okay. But I mean, who knows what the condition of the person was in the front seat. But yeah, I mean, if you can turn to talk to someone in the back seat and break the seatbelt, I don't care how big you are, that's bad, okay?
Something ain't right.
Yeah. So, and Tesla adds, I mean, we expect the vast majority of seatbelts to be fine, and they may send service technicians to customers if necessary. And then if they do have to fix something, fixing an improperly installed seatbelt assembly will take about 6 minutes, Tesla officials said.
Yeah, I imagine that's one of those, there's a single bolt that holds it, you ratchet it out, throw the new one on, whatever. But
done.
Yeah. At least it's a quick fix. And the fact that they are recalling 90,000 cars when they actually in the article when I was reading it, they actually said, people could test this themselves, but we still feel like we should be ultimately responsible for making sure that it's safe. So bring it to your Tesla service area station and have it looked at. So, it seems like it's more than just they crunched the numbers and the lawsuit losses would exceed or what the normal way a car manufacturer determines when to recall. It seems like they're really trying to make good on their we want this to be the best car in the world, and if that means recalling 90,000 cars to make sure that the seatbelts are okay, we're going to do it.
It seems likely to me that Teslas will become very common on the road everywhere over the next, say, 2 decades as battery technology continues to improve, range anxiety goes away, and charge times come down. All of the things that are going to make it, dubious in certain people's lives to be able to handle a car like that. It really does need to fit into your life. It'll go away. I mean, I see them all over the road when I'm in Central California area, San Francisco and the Bay Area, because all the tech nerds love to drive them. Yep. It seems a little less practical up in the Northeast where we're dealing with a lot of cold and and so on. But man, everything I read about Tesla and their philosophy and the way they're, pushing the car out the door, their interest in, the human interaction with the vehicle and just how it should behave and, what the ownership experience should be like. It kind of feels like they're on our side. Not that it's a free car; it's really expensive, but it's really philosophically does seem to be on the side of the consumer, and so yeah, the whole we're concerned about the safety of the people driving our cars fits right in with other things I've heard them say.
Yeah, I sort of see them as almost what Apple was in the last decade for computing and mobile devices and all of that, where they're pushing the envelope of the polish and the customer experience, in this case for cars instead of computers and mobile devices, but the obsession with design and quality just seems to be it's just that preeminent thing that they are concerned with. So yeah, it's I only see more and more of them coming to market, especially when the cheaper models start trickling in a few years, hopefully. So on to our feature today, which is computer history. This comes to us, this is a site I found on livescience.com, and it's sort of there's a brief history of everything book about the universe. This is sort of a brief history of computing. And so this thing just breaks down from A to Z, or rather from the beginning of computing up until modern times, some of the biggest events here. And so I figured we'd just sort of run through some of these. The interesting thing, like I knew about the Babbage engine that Charles Babbage designed back in the 1800s, but I did not know that a Frenchman named Joseph Marie Jacquard invented a loom that used punched wooden cards to automatically weave fabric designs. This was in 1801. And this is the fundamental technology that early computers would use as well for punch cards. So you could use a punch card, run this loom, and based on the punch card, it would design the fabric. That's just really cool to me. 1801.
1822, Charles Babbage conceives of a steam-driven calculating machine that would be able to compute tables of numbers. The project, funded by the English government's a failure, and then, but more than a century later, of course, the world's first computer was actually built. But the Babbage engine, if you've never seen it in person, there's a picture of it here at the top of the livescience.com article. There is a Babbage engine in the Computer History Museum somewhere in the San Francisco area, San Jose, Mountain View. I don't remember what town it's actually in, but I got to see it. It's a huge thing, very big and just impressive. And I guess this would be early steampunk, I guess you could say.
Yeah. It's amazing to me the ingenuity that was required to make a steam-powered computer. So the next major thing on the list here is from 1890, where, again, punch cards come in. A guy named Herman Hollerith designed a punch card system to calculate the 1880 census. It was used to accomplish the task in just 3 years and save the government $5 million, which $5 million in 1890 money is a lot of money. And this guy established the company that would ultimately become IBM. So it's 125 years ago.
I am pleased to report that my computer science education did not involve punch cards. I will say that.
Mine either.
So moving ahead into the 20th century, 1936, Alan Turing presents the notion of a universal machine, later called the Turing machine, capable of computing anything that is computable. The central concept of the modern computer was based on his ideas, and Turing comes up a lot in computing conversations as you look at history. A very, very important character with a sad ending, actually.
Yeah, definitely. Next here, let's jump up to 1943, 1944. Two University of Pennsylvania professors, John Mauchly and J. Presper Eckert, built the electronic numerical integrator and calculator, ENIAC. So that's probably a name that some people are familiar with. It's considered the grandfather of digital computers, and it fills a 20-foot by 40-foot room and has 18,000 vacuum tubes. So
Oh,
this,
yeah. Okay, so the vacuum tube thing brings back to memory that this is kind of where the term bug comes from,
yep,
where a physical insect got stuck inside of a vacuum tube, caused it to short circuit,
yep,
and
there was a
they had to
bug in
track
it.
it down and find it. There was a bug in the system. Yeah.
And that became the slang term for whenever there was something wrong. Yep.
Yeah. Then in 1946, these guys leave the University of Pennsylvania, that's Maudsley and Presper, and they receive funding to move the needle ahead. They received funding from the Census Bureau to build the UNIVAC, the first commercial computer for business and government applications.
Sounds like a giant vacuum cleaner.
It does.
The Univac.
But ENIAC and UNIVAC, I mean, anytime you study computer science history, those come up. They're always there.
Yeah. So 1947, just 1 year later, three guys from Bell Laboratories invent the transistor, and they discovered how to make an electric switch with solid materials and no need for a vacuum. So we are starting to phase out of the vacuum tube requirement. It doesn't officially happen for some time, but that was the start of it in 1947, thanks to Bell Laboratories.
Transistors being absolutely massive, a huge, well, in size at this point,
right?
But significant to computing, a very big deal. 1953, then, Grace Hopper develops the first computer language, which eventually becomes known as COBOL. Thomas Johnson Watson Jr., son of IBM CEO Thomas Johnson Watson Sr., thanks for that, guys, conceives of the IBM 701 EDPM to help the UN keep tabs on Korea during the war. So we've got a big system, and also the invention of COBOL, the programming language, which I am sorry to say absorbed a significant portion of my college career, as I spent 2 long semesters in computer labs writing COBOL code. I'd get it printed out for me. I'd request a printout at night. I could pick it up in the morning and look at what I had written. COBOL, multiple divisions, many, many business systems. To this day, still have COBOL code kicking around. I mean, it's far from people that do it, it's mostly maintenance stuff, but there's still advances in COBOL, I hear.
Yeah, I mean it's an in-demand job skill still, because there are so many systems that still are built upon it.
I wouldn't say majorly in demand, but I'm amazed that it still has life, and there's still people that work in
sure.
The COBOL
well, I mean,
world.
let's look at it this way: 1953, so that makes COBOL 62. It would get a senior discount at Friendlies or wherever. COBOL is 62 this year. Unbelievable. Although not much younger is Fortran, because it was born in 1954. So we've got that ringing in at 61 years old.
There were various iterations of Fortran, such as Fortran 77, which I again, going back to my computer science education, was the one I spent time with. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I recall about Fortran, it was really good with math. If you had to deal with complex, floating point decimal, it could deal with all of that stuff, which surprisingly a lot of computer CPUs aren't good at that. And so you've got to do a lot of complex numerical manipulation to get highly accurate results. And again, I'm going by memory here. Maybe I'm wrong, but that is what Fortran was especially good at.
Okay. Yeah, I never learned any Fortran, so I'll take your word for it. So yeah, that's 61 years old this year.
Let's move ahead to 1964. Douglas Engelbart shows a prototype of the modern computer with a mouse and graphical user interface. Woohoo! This marks the evolution of the computer from a specialized machine for scientists and mathematicians to technology that is more accessible to the general public. So we start, 1964, it was before we were born, long before.
Yeah.
You got a mouse and you got a GUI. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it really is. And then just 5 years later, 1969, a group of developers at Bell Labs produced Unix, an operating system that addressed compatibility issues. It was written in the C programming language, and it was portable across multiple platforms and became the operating system of choice among mainframes at large companies and government entities. Due to the slow nature of the system, it never quite gained traction among home PC users.
Oh, 1969. It's not like there were that many home PC users.
No, there really weren't. And even through the 80s, it wasn't common to have necessarily. I mean, in the 80s we had a computer, but my family was sort of the exception. It wasn't common to have a home PC until late 80s, early 90s. Even it became more and more common.
And the early stuff we were talking about, well, as it points out, was not running Unix. We have talked on this show about the Commodore 64. That goes back to one of our very first shows, which was running the Commodore 64 BASIC as its core operating system.
Which is just crazy to think about now.
It is. It is. Of course, now we have Linux, which is Unix-like, but in fact is not Unix, as I understand it. It is a variant that is all its own.
Correct. When Linus, he pronounces it Linus. When he developed it, it was because he wanted a Unix system, but you had to license it and all that. So he decided to build a system that was largely interchangeable. And look what it's become. It's the number one operating system for web servers, and it's still number one for high performance computing and things like that. So,
taking nothing away from Windows and other important operating systems in the world, Linux is the most important operating system in the world. But period. Cloud computing is built on it. That's the world runs on Linux effectively at this point.
Right.
Again, taking nothing away from Microsoft and the Azure cloud and so on. I mean, Linux is that's it. That's the future. And everything I have researched and studied about cloud and cloud computing and what's going on in that world, it's all Linux, containers and Docker and so on. It's Linux underneath. So.
And even Microsoft is starting to adopt running containerized systems based upon that code and things like that. So interesting that it all sort of roots back to 1969 with the Bell Labs producing Unix.
Well, then we move on to 1970. The newly formed Intel unveils the Intel 1103, the first dynamic access memory DRAM chip, and of course DRAM we're still using today, and which fascinates me. I mean, we think back to the last show we recorded. We were talking about early static RAM that was up in, was it the Gemini spacecraft that went up for auction? That was pretty interesting, more or less ancient technology. And then flash forward to the modern nanotube NRAM technology that we talked about in that show. It's just amazing how quickly technology, even though we think sometimes it's slow. I mean, we're going back to 1970. That's not that long ago. We just started with the DRAM chip.
Yeah. Well, and it's sort of, I guess the analogy that pops into my head is, we still drive cars. And cars have been around for a long time, but they wouldn't be recognizable to, I mean, they would, but they've come so far in their evolution that to compare an old Packard or something with, a modern, like a Tesla, it's like two different epochs that they exist in. And this is sort of the same thing with DRAM. Yes, it's DRAM, but it's a far cry from what it was 45 years ago. 1971, so that was 1970. In 1971, Alan Shugart leads a team of IBM engineers who invent the first floppy disk, allowing data to be shared among computers. So this was, I don't know, in 1971, was that probably the 10-inch floppy disk? I'm unsure, but these things were massive back in the day.
It's an interesting question, and I don't know exactly how big it would have been back in the day, but yeah, I mean floppy in the sense that it was on a flimsy, if you will, magnetically coated piece of plastic, with a ring in the middle. You'd mount this thing, and it would spin inside of a sleeve, and then you would read and write from it. If you're really young, you genuinely may not remember that.
Right.
And it would have been a floppy disk, as contrasted by a hard disk, typically a pack. Now, I don't know exactly in the early 70s what these looked like, but I know some from the early 80s that I saw. They were hard metal platters that you would, encased in like a plastic bubble with a handle on top of it. You would load this thing on top of the disk reading machine, kind of lock it in place, and then you'd be able to read from the hard disk platter. And the trade-off between hard disk and floppy disk was capacity. You get less on a floppy disk, more on a hard disk. Cheaper to do a floppy disk, more expensive for a hard disk, and so on. And of course, we still use the term some of us hard drive today, even though really what's going on under the hood has become quite different.
Right. Now
Floppy
it's all
disks
solid state, or
it's solid state. The spinning platters are slowly but surely fading out, and I imagine will be completely gone in the next, I don't know, decade or so.
I would think.
Floppy disks are just nothing but a memory now. I mean, I grew up with 5 1/4 or 3.5 inch floppy disks. And maybe there's a lot of people on this show that remember those, but I mean, gosh, when's the last time you used one, Eric?
Oh, several years ago, just to actually, the only reason I did was I wanted to try installing Windows 3.1 in a VM. So I had 3.5 inch floppy installation media for Windows 3.1, and I actually borrowed a USB floppy drive from someone and installed it in a VM just for kicks. And then I went, that was kind of fun. Delete.
It's almost a sort of heresy. You
Yeah,
install Windows 3.1 in a VM. Then again, I ran into, it's a story I didn't actually put in the show notes today, but I ran into a story where I think it was a French airport, a Windows 3.1 was an operating system running a critical function for the airport, and it shut down, it crashed, and no one knew how to bring the stupid thing back online.
Wow.
And whatever the system was, I've forgotten, and I don't have the article in front of me. But a spokesperson for the airport made the comment that, yeah, we've got certain systems that run on ancient operating systems like Windows 3.1, and there is no update to it. That's just the way this system works. It's not like we're behind the times. It's like this is what it is. Wow. And we're losing people that remember how to even work on this stuff because they're retiring.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so while we were discussing this, I did look it up. Apparently, the first floppy disk drive that was developed was an 8-inch disk. So,
8-inch, okay.
Yep.
1973, then, Robert Metcalf, a member of the research staff for Xerox, develops Ethernet for connecting multiple computers and other hardware.
And thus course, a career was born, right, Ethan?
Well, yeah, for me and lots of other people that listen to this show, no doubt. Ethernet, of course, it's a shared medium. It's in its original conception. Mm-hmm. It's a wire. You tap into the wire with other people that are tapped into the wire, and you can communicate. One person can talk at a time on the wire. If two people try to talk at the same time, you have an electrical collision. And so Ethernet was built in with, as part of its algorithm, a collision detection algorithm where they would randomly back off for some amount of time if a collision was detected, and then they'd try to send their message again, the hopes that they'd have different random back-off times and would be able to get a unique hold of that wire. Original Ethernet, early stuff, was a very thick wire, and you would use something called a vampire tap where you would physically cut a hole into the wire and then put a tap onto it, and to connect another computer to that system. And there's if you Google around, there's pictures of the very first Ethernet and Robert Metcalf's conception of it. He's actually got there's a hand drawing that shows how this would all work. And for those of you listening to Citizens Tech who are not network engineers, Ethernet is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's the thing that you plug into on your router at your home if you've got hardwire as opposed to wireless. And most data centers in the world, the way the servers connect into the system is via Ethernet. So Ethernet wasn't just a fad. It's one of the most important technologies in the world.
Yeah, that's a pivotal moment. And then several more pivotal moments from 1974 to 1977. Several personal computers hit the market, including the Mark 8 Altair, the IBM 5100, Radio Shack's TRS-80 or the Trash 80, and the Commodore PET.
The TRS-80. I remember a TRS-83, the Model 3, that was at my house briefly. We didn't have it long, but I do remember that system. And being able to do a little programming on it, and there were some games you could play on it. It was really cool.
Yeah. So that was a big, just in 3 years, some really impactful systems were released just in succession.
Well, it's computing to the masses. It's the beginning of a change in, it's before the internet, but it's making this sort of technology available to everyone.
Yeah, and in the mid-'70s to 1980 really were that turning point where it became available to everyone.
Okay, let's move ahead to 1975. The January issue of Popular Electronics magazine features the Altair 8080, described as the world's first mini computer kit to rival commercial models. Two computer geeks, Paul Allen and Bill Gates, have you heard of these guys, offered to write software for the Altair using the new BASIC language. And on April 4th, after the success of this first endeavor, the two childhood friends formed their own software company, Microsoft.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt you have. I didn't know they went back to 75. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Of course, I guess the competition would be what happened next in 1976.
Right, 1976. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak start Apple Computers on April Fool's Day, and they roll out the Apple I, the first computer with a single circuit board. So that, they were hawking this thing at computer fairs, or, I guess they were user groups where people would meet up and talk about the gadgets they were building and all that. 1976. So we got
that really was a garage effort, if I remember right.
It literally was, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. That really started in a garage, and they expanded pretty quickly following that.
A couple of things happened in 1977. Radio Shack's initial production run of the Trash 80 was just 3,000. TRS 80, but that was its loving nickname. The Trash 80 was just 3,000. And it sold like crazy. For the first time, non-geeks could write programs and make a computer do what they wished. And then also in 1977, Jobs and Wozniak incorporate Apple and show the Apple II at the first West Coast Computer Fair. It offered color graphics, and incorporates an audio cassette drive for storage. So color graphics is a bigger deal than you think, but most computer screens at that time were one color. It was monochrome.
Yep.
Yeah.
Amber or green or
Yep.
white. Yeah.
Yep. If you're a real nerd and you've got a terminal emulator, you might set it to green on black because, you know, old school, baby.
All the cool kids do it. So let's see. Next here on the list, 1979 is the first word processing program that really made home word processing a reality. When MicroPro International released WordStar, which I've heard of, I've never seen or used.
I have way back in the day WordStar, although in my house WordStar quickly was eclipsed by WordPerfect.
Yes.
WordPerfect was awesome. I spent a lot of time with WordPerfect back in the 80s and into the early 90s even.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
1981, then, the IBM personal computer codenamed Acorn is introduced. It uses MS-DOS from Microsoft. It's got an Intel chip, 2 floppy disk drives, an optional color monitor. Sears and Roebuck and Computerland sell the machines, marking it the first time a computer is available through outside distributors, and it also popularizes the term PC. So I would look at that system, codenamed Acorn, and say, okay, this is the first computer that most of us would think of when we think of a PC. It's kind of got that iconic look to it.
Yep. Yeah, and I think 1981. I'm trying to think what Intel chip would have been in that in 80.
Probably an 8088.
Or an 8086 or
8088.
Yeah, I'm not sure which
maybe.
In 1981, but
8088 maybe would have been later than that.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, it would have been later than that.
But looking at the image of it, it's sort of that's what an IBM personal computer looked like for roughly 15 years.
Beige case, nasty big huge keyboard, and a big fat monitor sitting on top of it.
Yeah,
yep.
And the sweet dot matrix printer.
Sweet indeed.
So sort of flying in the face of that IBM sort of beige box concept, although ironically it was still a beige box. 1983, Apple's Lisa is the first personal computer with a GUI. It also featured drop-down menus and icons. It was a massive failure, but it eventually did evolve into the Macintosh. So the Lisa was this, notoriously failed project. They wanted, I forget, was it like $4,000 or $6,000 for this thing? But it really was the first PC with a GUI that you would use instead of just text entry and rough text ASCII type graphics and things.
For the early PC market, it was Apple putting its flag in the ground of the kind of user experience they wanted people to have versus what you were getting with MS-DOS. And it got, it was significant because if you look at 1985, Microsoft announces Windows, its response to Apple's GUI.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Commodore unveils the Amiga 1000, which features advanced audio and video capabilities. And so there's a lot of one-upsmanship going on here in the world.
Yeah, the 80s were rife with that. Oh, I mean, the 90s were too. But yeah, I distinctly remember hearing about Amigas and thinking, wow, they have, you can do audio and video on these things now. It's not just, text and numbers and, MS Paint or whatever. But the difference between systems at that time was so stark because they all focused on specific things. Like I remember in the early 90s hearing about Silicon Graphics and Cray supercomputers and things like that. I'm sort of diverging here from the topic at hand, but the theme here just being that there were very specialized use cases for computers, for different computers at this stage. And so, one-upping each other on, okay, well, we can do this. You can do that, but we can do this. Oh, yeah, well, we can do this. It was sort of a showmanship in the manufacturer as well. So it was definitely an interesting era. And then, so 1985 with Windows being released, but also 1985, the first .com domain name was registered on March 15th of 1985. And so this was, obviously years before the World Wide Web would become ubiquitous and everyone and their brother would be using it. But the Symbolics Computer Company, which is a small Massachusetts computer manufacturer, registered symbolics.com. And more than 2 years later, only 100 .coms had been registered. So these guys were early adopters to the extreme.
Yeah, very early, like, do we know we're going to get our value out of this? What's the point? And so on. They were seeing the vision before most of the world was at that point.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and kind of related to that, in 1990, you got Tim Berners-Lee, a researcher at CERN, the High Energy Physics Laboratory in Geneva, developed hypertext markup language, HTML, which gives rise to the World Wide Web. And if you're looking at something in a browser right now, you are still seeing HTML and a lot of other stuff too, but HTML is still at the core of what's going on.
Yeah, it's still the foundation. So we're 25 years ago, HTML was developed.
Oh, gosh, I'm starting to feel old now.
It's evolved so much. I remember, the first time reading about HTML and sitting down with zero programming experience and
writing a marquee tag and then everyone hating you. Do you remember that, Eric?
Yes. Yeah. Flash, blink that text and scroll it across in big pink and green letter. No, but I remember, when it was just sort of on the cusp of anyone being able to make a website, there were programs that were specifically for making websites. And there was one that was called Hot Metal because HTML. And I distinctly remember learning how to write HTML thanks to Hot Metal.
Oh, and of course, in the early days, it was browser one-upsmanship all the time.
Oh, yeah.
It was Netscape Navigator, and then, Microsoft's now got Internet Explorer, which was hot for, a minute. And then it was like, there's a new version of, something else. And it's awesomer than Explorer and use that instead. And it was back and forth. And what browser are you using? Oh, I use this. And you still get some of that. But overall, I mean, the browser market,
it's so standardized.
Yeah, everybody's kind of doing the same thing. And it's more about your privacy and how you can filter and, and the quality of the rendering engine, and these sorts of things.
How fast does it render JavaScript and all that? But it's not, back in the 90s, it was like, well, this browser supports VRML, VRML, virtual reality markup language. And I remember, thinking, oh, wow, this is the future. And then, it flops and no one actually cared about it.
1993, we move on to the Pentium microprocessor. Advances the use of graphics and music on PCs, and not long after that, Weird Al comes out. It's all about the Pentiums, so, which in a sense kind of indicates how much a part of pop culture the term Pentium became. Yep. That someone could write a parody song featuring the term, and everyone would get the joke.
Yep.
So.
And the dancing firemen in the clean suits, whatever. You remember those commercials?
Yeah, a bit.
The clean room manufacturing plant commercials. It's just that Intel marketed that brilliantly. That just is embedded in my memory.
And it's a brand that lives on today.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, they've gone to the Core series and all that. But everyone knows, you say Pentium, everyone knows what you mean, what you're talking about anyway. So 1994, PCs become gaming machines as Command and Conquer, Alone in the Dark 2, Theme Park, Magic Carpet, Descent, that's the big one on the list for me, and Little Big Adventure all share the market at the same time.
Was Descent a space simulator of some kind?
Yeah, you were in this ship and you went down into these labyrinthine shoot 'em up little, there were these other spaceship type things, and I forget the plot honestly, but it was
it's a very vague memory now. I
had a lot of fun with that, playing multiplayer over dial-up and all that with buddies when I was in high school. But yeah, the PC really started to become a gaming platform at that point, especially as CD-ROMs were more prevalent and all that. So the advent of the Pentium changed the availability of playing games with more realistic graphics and better sound and all that, because the CPU could actually handle it. And then came 3D accelerated graphics and all that in the mid 90s as well.
If you go up to livescience.com, we'll link to this in the show notes. The history continues. I mean, we could go for a lot longer here because there's more entries, but 1996, development of the Google search engine, Wi-Fi 1999, OS X 2001, and so on. So if you're interested in this sort of history, just go up in and read the rest of the article. There's more stuff there that's kind of fun. This is a great walk through time.
I had a blast reading through it. It was a little walk down memory lane in many ways. So on to content I like, and I found one that is called accountkiller.com, which is just kind of a cool domain name, first of all. But Account Killer lists instructions for removing your data and canceling your service from various service providers, because as we all know, that's not always easy. So you go to Account Killer, you can search for a certain service or site through the little search box, or their number, top 30 or so sites are listed right on the front page. So there's Facebook, Skype, Hotmail, Google, MSN, MySpace, all that. It has step-by-step instructions for how to delete an account, because most of these service providers don't actually want to make that very easy for you, because they want to retain your data and hope that you'll come back to their service. So accountkiller.com if you have any services that you want to cancel.
Hey, Eric, did you learn anything today?
I did learn something today, and it has to do with ancient history. So roughly 400 million years ago, so we're talking before trees came on the scene, Earth was home to giant mushrooms or funguses called protoaxites. And these things grew to a meter in circumference and up to 8 meters in height, so 24 roughly feet tall. They would have dominated the horizon. That would have been about the biggest thing besides rock outcrops and things that you would see. Giant fungus. We know about them because of the fossil record. These things are found all over the earth. Very, very cool article.
I'm sorry. An 8-meter mushroom gives a whole new definition to the term magic mushrooms. That is astonishing. I mean, it's like living in Alice in Wonderland kind of thing. So.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't have the apparently they were just sort of an obelisk shape. They don't have the mushroom cap that we're used to seeing on modern mushrooms. This is a fungus, not technically a mushroom. But yeah, it's 24 foot tall fungus. Unbelievable.
So we've looked at news of the present. We took a trip down memory lane in the past, and now we're going to look ahead to the future with a couple of quick articles before we close the show today. One is on oxygen sponge metal, and I've heard of heavy metal and Norse metal and death metal, but oxygen sponge metal is a new one on me. Anyway, this comes out of the University of Southern Denmark, an article on gizmag.com. And it's kind of the way I think of it as I read through the information here. It's sort of like a storage system for oxygen, kind of like an oxygen battery. So let's read through the main components here. You got a cobalt-based salt, and to quote the article, the key component of the new material is the element cobalt, which is bound in a specially designed organic molecule. in standard form, and depending on the available oxygen content, the ambient temperature, and the barometric pressure, the absorption of oxygen by the material from its surroundings may take anything from seconds to days. So, okay, you've got this new material, this salt that can absorb oxygen at varying rates depending on the atmospheric conditions around it. Okay? And another piece of this here is it can act as an artificial hemoglobin. The material is both a sensor and a container for oxygen. The article says we can use it to bind, store, and transport oxygen like a solid artificial hemoglobin. Okay, so when you get oxygen back out of it, the crystalline material changes color when either absorbing or releasing oxygen. It's black when saturated, and it's pink when oxygen is released. 80s aerobic clothing wearers just rejoice, black and pink, there you go. And so why would we use this? Why is this interesting? Well, we could use it for harvesting oxygen and storing it from the oceans would be one application. And then you can also control the release of it. We see release of oxygen when we heat up the material, and we have also seen it when we apply vacuum, says Professor McKenzie, working on this project. We are now wondering if light can also be used as a trigger for the material to release oxygen. This has prospects in the growing field of artificial photosynthesis, the process that plants go through.
Yeah, and that's sort of that's an ever-expanding segment of scientific research right now, artificial photosynthesis. They're making some headway in that, so this is an interesting development for sure.
Then the last bit you found, Eric, was on Samsung VR.
Yeah, so Samsung has entered co-development with Oculus, the makers of the Oculus Rift.
The headset that makes you nauseous.
Yes, unless you add a virtual nose to your game
right.
program, right?
That's right.
So this is via TechCrunch, but I recently became the owner of a Samsung Galaxy S6. Ooh. And so this caught my attention because while it's not exactly Tron, the consumer VR field is finally becoming approachable. Owners of the Samsung S6, the S6 Edge, the S6 Edge Plus, or the Note 5 can purchase this $99 headset for the phone.
So you mean you plug it into the phone, or you look at the phone through it? Or?
You actually clip your phone into the headset, and then you put the headset on, and it does a 50-50 split on the screen so that you see with your left eye on the left side and your right eye on the right side, and has the proper divergence to give you the 3D depth of vision. Oh. So yeah, you slap your phone into this thing, and the reason the S6, S6 Edge, etc. These things these are 8-core phones, so they have some real power in them now. The gotcha is, it's $99 for the headset, but you also need a Bluetooth controller, which will run you about $60 for a pretty good one. So there have been some gimmicky, I mean, not necessarily gimmicky, but there's Google Cardboard. If you don't know what it is, Google it. It's basically a headset that you build out of cardboard. You can download the schematic and take a cardboard box and cut it out and fold it certain ways. But this is really the first mass produced one for consumers. So the big thing here with any device and any medium is going to be content. Content is always going to be king. So what's the deal with the content that's available? Basically, the Samsung Gear app has the Oculus Store in it, it acts as a cohesive hub for the VR experience. So you can get games, Samsung Gear apps. There's a library app, etc. Games are one of the big things for it right now. There's VR Karts, which is like a virtual reality Mario Kart game, if you've ever played Mario Kart. So you drive your little kart around and try to make people crash and finish first, all that. There's Land's End, which is not the catalog clothing store, though that has applications in VR too, eventually probably. But it's all about exploration. Mm-hmm. It's been called gorgeous and meditative, immersive, stunning, extraordinary, beautiful and serene. John Carmack, who was formerly of ID Software, which developed Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, Quake, all that. He's now the CTO of Oculus. He says, this is great VR. I had a great time playing through. I'm really proud to see the quality like this that quality like this is showing up on Gear VR. He has a vested interest in, seeing quality titles on the platform since he is now part of Oculus. The other big game on the list was Omega Agent, which has various locales, but there are 3 big selling points: a jetpack, a shotgun, and robots, rockets, and UFOs to shoot. The guy who wrote this article said that that's the second most time he invested in any of the games was in Omega Agent. Watching the video, it looked really kind of fun. But it's not just games. There's also Oculus Video that has 9,000 videos from Vimeo, Twitch, etc. They have
all 3D. I take it as the big thing here.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And they have 70 feature-length films from Fox and Lionsgate as well. So 3D versions of those films that you can have on your Samsung Gear VR. And then there's also a dedicated Netflix app. I don't know much about that, but I presume there's probably 3D content that Netflix is serving up for that, but I'm not sure.
So the big idea is you put the helmet on your head, you slap the phone into the helmet, so now you're wearing the phone on your face, and then you put a Bluetooth controller in your hand, and
earbuds in, and
off you go.
Yep.
Huh.
And you can explore these other things. The next big killer app should be social integration. And since Facebook now actually owns Oculus, you can rest assured that they are working feverishly to bring Facebook into the third dimension. So
yeah, you're going to need to have a wall sensor for teenagers walking around in meat space with their helmet on there, with the phone strapped to their face now. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm actually seriously looking at potentially grabbing one of these and trying it out, and I will report my findings if I do so. If I can be coerced into plunking down the $100 for it.
Well, that'll be neat. I'd like to see that, and also I'd like to see how silly you look with a helmet and a phone strapped to your face.
You will never see that.
Well, everyone, thanks for listening to Citizens of Tech this week. And we'd like to remind you that Citizens of Tech is brought to you by Cyberdyne Systems, proud manufacturers of Skynet and humanoid-destroying robots. If you've got a species you'd like to destroy, Cyberdyne can help. And while you're on hold with Cyberdyne, log on to the internet, follow us on Twitter at Citizens of Tech, send us email to citizensoftech@gmail.com. You can like us on Facebook, and please tell all of your friends about us. We want you to listen. We want them to listen. We want their families and their children to listen. And hey, if their dog has an iPod, that's good enough for us.